The rain had been falling steadily all evening, tapping softly against the windows like a warning. I had just finished a long, grueling day at work and was looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening at home. But as I walked through the door, everything felt off. It wasn't something I could explain at first, just a subtle shift in the air, as though the entire world was holding its breath. I took a few steps into the living room, setting my bag down by the door. The house was eerily quiet. I called out, "Samantha?" But there was no answer. I wasn't particularly concerned. She had a way of disappearing into her own world, sometimes for hours, lost in her thoughts or buried in some book or project. It wasn't unusual for her to be in a different room, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake. Something was wrong. I moved through the house, glancing into each room. The kitchen, the study, the spare bedroom, all empty. But then I noticed something strange, a set of documents scattered across the kitchen table. They looked official, much more official than any papers I had seen lying around before. The kind of documents that shouldn't be left carelessly about, certainly not in the middle of the day. I walked over and picked them up. At first, it seemed like regular paperwork, bills, some forms, tax documents. But then I saw the heading, bold and unmistakable, divorce petition. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't possible. I must have been seeing things. I glanced around the kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place. The countertops were clean, the fridge was stocked, the little decorative touches were where they always were. But those papers, they felt like a slap to the face. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. Was this some kind of twisted joke? Had Samantha, who'd never been much for humor, pulled some prank I didn't understand? Maybe she was testing me, seeing how I'd react. Or maybe she had already made up her mind. I didn't know. I set the papers down carefully and took a step back, trying to calm myself. I tried calling her again. "Samantha?" But still, there was no answer. It was then that I saw her, standing in the doorway, watching me. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes dark with something I couldn't identify. She wasn't holding anything, but there was a tension in the air, thick enough to suffocate me. "I didn't hear you come in," I said, trying to sound casual, but the words came out hollow. Samantha didn't respond. Instead, she stepped into the kitchen and walked past me, heading straight to the coffee machine. I watched her as she moved, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was walking on eggshells. "Why didn't you answer me?" I asked, my voice faltering slightly. "I've been calling you for a while." She finally looked at me, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Maybe I didn't want to answer you," she said quietly. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She had never spoken to me like that before, not in all the years we had been together. Something was off. I couldn't help myself anymore. I picked up the divorce papers from the table and held them out to her. "What's this, Samantha? Is this really happening?" My voice was shaking now, a mixture of confusion and anger bubbling to the surface. She didn't flinch. She didn't look surprised, either. She just took a sip of her coffee and stared at me for what felt like an eternity. "I thought you'd figure it out sooner," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "I've been trying to give you hints for months, but you never listened, do you?" Hints? What was she talking about? "You've been pulling away," she continued, her voice still that eerily calm tone. "I'm tired of carrying this relationship on my own, Lucas. You've been absent in every sense of the word. This is what it's come to." The words hit me like a blow. I couldn't process them fast enough. "You're serious?" I asked, the disbelief in my voice clear. "You're actually serious?" She didn't respond right away. She set her coffee cup down, and then she finally looked me in the eyes. "You're not the man I married," she said softly. "You're not even the man I wanted. You're just there." It felt like the floor dropped out from beneath me. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about the papers anymore. This was about everything I had failed to see, the slow erosion of a relationship I thought was rock solid. I had been so focused on work, on trying to do the right thing, that I had neglected the one thing that mattered most. Her words echoed in my head. "You're just there." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this. "You should sign the papers," Samantha said, her voice now sharper. "You've been avoiding it, but it's time." I froze. The pen was right there, lying on the table. The documents were still in my hands, and I could feel the weight of them like they were burning my skin. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to sign the papers? For the first time in years, I felt a cold, undeniable clarity. This wasn't some small argument. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple apology or a heartfelt conversation. This was the end, and I didn't know what to do next. There was a strange silence in the room, almost suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing, but nothing else. Samantha stood there, waiting for a response, and I felt like my entire world had just tilted off its axis. The woman I had shared everything with for years, the one who had been my partner, my confidant, the mother of our children, was telling me that it was over. No dramatic fight, no blow-up arguments, just cold, quiet finality. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and everything I had taken for granted was slipping through my fingers. I stared at her, at the way she stood with her arms crossed over her chest, almost as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. I had never seen her like this before. There was no anger in her eyes, no tears, no frustration, just a quiet, calm certainty. "Samantha," I said, my voice shaky, "you can't be serious. You can't just walk away from everything we've built." She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "I'm not walking away from everything," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "I'm walking away from you, the man you've become." Her words hit me harder than I thought they would. She wasn't angry. She was resigned. And that's what made it worse. It wasn't a hasty decision, an outburst in the heat of the moment. No, this had been brewing for a long time. I just hadn't seen it coming. I wanted to argue, to convince her that I was still the man she married, that I could change, that we could fix this. But deep down, I knew it was too late for that. She had already made up her mind. She had been pulling away from me for months, maybe even longer. I had just been too oblivious to notice. I picked up the pen and toyed with it in my hands. My mind raced, torn between a desire to fight and a sense of helplessness. How had it come to this? I had always tried to do the right thing, always worked hard, tried to be a good husband, a good father. I thought I was doing everything I was supposed to do. But now I saw it for what it was, an endless cycle of just existing, not living. And somehow, she had seen it long before I did. "You can't be serious," I muttered again, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't who you are. You're not the woman I married." Her eyes softened, but only for a second. "I'm exactly who I am," she said quietly. "It's you who isn't the man I married. You've been checked out for months, Lucas. I had to beg you to spend time with me, and when you did, it was like you were somewhere else. You're not present. You haven't been for a long time." The sting of her words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to deny it, to shout that she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I had been distant. I had been consumed by my work, my own struggles, my own frustrations, and I had let her slip through my fingers without even realizing it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the realization that I was losing her was a weight I couldn't lift. "So this is it? You're just done?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You're walking away? No second chances, no nothing?" Samantha didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the counter and picked up her coffee cup, staring into it as though searching for an answer in the dark liquid. She took a long sip, then set it down with a soft clink, the sound echoing in the silence. "I've given you second chances," she finally said, her voice softer now, but no less resolute. "I've been asking for your attention, for your love, for your presence. But it's like I'm invisible to you, and I can't keep doing this. I deserve more." I felt the weight of her words crashing down on me. She was right. She had been asking for more, but I had been too wrapped up in myself to notice. Too busy playing the role of the responsible husband, the one who worked hard and provided, but who forgot to actually be there. I had been so focused on what I thought mattered that I had neglected what really did. Her, us, our relationship. She picked up the divorce papers again and placed them on the table in front of me. "You need to sign them, Lucas. It's over. It has been for a long time. You've just been too blind to see it." I stared at the papers. The reality of what she was saying finally started to sink in. She wasn't giving me a choice. She wasn't giving me a chance to explain or try to fix things. She had already moved on, in her mind. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a plea for me to try harder. It was the end. I took the pen and clicked it open, the click of the pen echoing in the silence of the room. I looked at her one last time, hoping for some sign of softness, some indication that this was a mistake, that she didn't mean it. But all I saw was a woman who had already let go. And that was when I realized, it wasn't just her letting go of me. It was me letting go of myself. I had been holding on to an idea of who I thought I was, but it was never real. The man she married was long gone, and the man I was now wasn't someone I even recognized. With a deep breath, I signed the papers. As I placed the pen back down on the table, a strange stillness settled between us. It was as if the air itself had become thicker, heavier. Samantha stood there, watching me, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about signing papers anymore. It was about everything I had failed to see, every moment I had let slip by, without truly understanding the gravity of it all. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I didn't know how to answer her. What could I say? What could I say to explain why I was letting her go? Why I had allowed our marriage to crumble without ever putting in the effort to rebuild it? The answer was simple. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to fix what had already been broken. Samantha took a deep breath and moved to the living room, her footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. I could hear the soft rustle of her clothes as she sat down on the couch, the tension in the room palpable. She didn't turn back to look at me. Instead, she stared straight ahead, lost in her own thoughts, and I was left standing in the kitchen, feeling more alone than I had ever felt before. I walked over to the window and stared out at the rain, watching the droplets race down the glass. My mind was a mess of conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, I felt a sense of relief that the decision had been made, that the weight of the unknown had been lifted. On the other hand, I felt empty, hollow. Signing those papers wasn't just an act of finality. It was a realization that everything I had known, everything I had hoped for, was gone. I had just given up on the one thing that had meant everything to me. Minutes passed, and I finally turned around to face her. She was still sitting there, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though trying to protect whatever was left of her. I wanted to go to her, to tell her that I would do anything to make it right, to beg for one more chance. But I couldn't. I had already signed the papers. I had already let her go. "Why did you wait so long?" I asked quietly, my voice shaky. "Why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten?" Samantha's eyes flickered to mine, but she didn't immediately answer. She stared at me for a long moment, almost as though she was debating whether or not to share what had been on her mind all this time. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to tell you, Lucas. I really did. But every time I brought it up, you would brush me off. You didn't want to hear it. You didn't want to see it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known there were issues between us, but I had never taken them seriously. I thought if I just kept working hard, kept my head down, that everything would work itself out. But I had been wrong. I had been blind to the cracks that had been forming for months, and now they had become a chasm too wide to cross. "I thought I was doing everything right," I said, my voice faltering. "I worked hard. I provided for us. I thought that was enough." "It wasn't enough," she replied softly, shaking her head. "You can't fix a relationship with money and tasks. You can't fix it by just being present physically but not emotionally. I needed you, Lucas, but you were never really here." Her words cut through me like a knife, but they were true. I had been so focused on what I thought mattered that I had neglected the most important thing, her. I had taken her love for granted, assuming it would always be there, no matter how distant I became. For the first time in a long time, I realized just how much I had failed her. I had been so caught up in my own world that I had forgotten about the woman standing right in front of me, the woman who had once been my everything. And now, she was walking away. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you sure you want to throw it all away?" She finally looked at me, her eyes softening just slightly, but there was no hesitation in her gaze. "I've already thrown it away, Lucas. I've been throwing it away for a long time. This is just the last step." Her words left me speechless. I stood there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do or say. She had made up her mind. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't have control over everything. I couldn't fix this. Samantha stood up slowly, her movements deliberate, as if she was preparing herself for what came next. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Lucas. I'm not even asking for you to understand. I'm just asking for you to let me go." She walked past me, her hand brushing mine as she made her way to the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch her walk out of our lives. As the door clicked shut behind her, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But it wasn't a breath of relief. It was a breath of finality. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought would last forever, was gone. And all that was left was the empty space where it used to be. The sound of the door shutting behind her was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It echoed through the empty house like a gunshot, marking the moment everything changed. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the door as if I could somehow will her to come back. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the reality of it settle in. It felt like my life had been flipped upside down, like everything I had known to be true was suddenly a lie. I had always believed that if you worked hard enough, if you gave enough of yourself, everything would fall into place. But now, standing in the silence of the house, it was painfully clear that I had been wrong. I had given everything I thought I should, but I had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, the love between us. I wanted to call her, beg her to come back, tell her that I would change, that I was sorry for everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't do that to myself, to her. She had made her choice. And deep down, I knew I had made mine the moment I let her walk out the door. The house felt suffocating, too quiet. I walked over to the kitchen counter, where the divorce papers still lay, a permanent reminder of my failure. I picked them up again, my fingers trembling as I ran them through my hands. I had signed them, but it didn't feel real. How could it? How could a piece of paper really signify the end of everything? The end of a life I had built, a family I had loved? I thought back to the day we first met, how everything seemed so simple then. We were young, full of hope and ambition. I had promised her I would always be there for her, that I would never let her down. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten those promises. I had gotten too comfortable, too focused on my own problems to see that she was slowly slipping away from me. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. The weight of the situation was crushing, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the fact that I had been too blind to see what was happening. I thought about all the times she had tried to talk to me, tried to reach out, but I had brushed her off. I had thought I was doing enough, but I wasn't. I hadn't been present. I hadn't been there when she needed me the most. For the first time in my life, I was faced with the reality that love wasn't enough. No matter how much I loved her, no matter how hard I tried to make things work, it wasn't enough if I wasn't fully invested, if I wasn't emotionally present. And now, she was gone. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The house was empty now, empty of her laughter, her warmth, her presence. It felt like a hollow shell, a reminder of what I had lost. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I thought about texting her, calling her, but what could I say? What could I do? The damage had already been done. I had already lost her. Instead, I opened up the photo gallery on my phone and scrolled through the pictures of us. There were photos of vacations, of anniversaries, of family dinners. I paused on one photo, a picture of the two of us laughing at a beach in the summer, the sun shining down on us as we held hands. We looked so happy, so carefree. It felt like another lifetime now, a lifetime that had been taken from me in the blink of an eye. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the memory, trying to keep it alive. But the more I tried, the more it slipped through my fingers. She wasn't mine anymore. And no matter how much I wished things could be different, I knew it was over. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, unable to sit still. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the silence unbearable. I tried to distract myself, tried to keep my mind occupied, but it was impossible. All I could think about was her, the way she had walked out, the finality of it. I knew I had to move on. I knew I couldn't stay in this house, in this empty shell of a life. But where would I go? What would I do? The only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't stay here. Not with the memories of what we had, not with the constant reminder of my failures staring me in the face. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, not sure where I was headed, but needing to escape. I didn't know how long I walked, or where I went. The night air was cool, the streets quiet, but I didn't mind. The world felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Like I didn't belong anymore. As I walked, my mind kept racing. How had it come to this? What could I have done differently? Was there any way I could have stopped it? But I already knew the answer. There was nothing I could have done. The moment I stopped listening to her, stopped being the man she needed me to be, that was when it was over. I had let her go, and now, I was the one left with nothing. The cold night air bit at my skin as I walked aimlessly through the city. My jacket offered little protection against the chill, but it was the least of my concerns. My mind was a storm, a whirlwind of thoughts and questions that refused to settle. What now? What was left for me? I had lost her. I had lost everything. The man I used to be, the life I had built, gone in the blink of an eye. The reality of the situation was starting to sink in, but it felt like I was standing outside of myself, watching it all unfold from a distance. I could feel the sting of regret, the overwhelming weight of my own mistakes pressing down on me, but I didn't know how to fix it. How could I fix something that had already fallen apart beyond repair? I walked past the familiar streets, the ones that had once felt like home, and now they were just reminders of a life that no longer belonged to me. I found myself outside a small bar, its neon sign flickering in the dark. I didn't want to go in. I didn't want to talk to anyone. But something pulled me inside, some desperate need to escape the silence in my own head. The bar was dimly lit, and the low murmur of conversation filled the air. I walked up to the counter and ordered a drink, my hands still shaking from everything that had happened. The bartender slid the glass across the counter, and I took a long sip, the burn of the alcohol doing little to dull the ache inside. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Samantha. The way she had walked out the door, leaving me standing there, helpless. She had made her decision, and in that moment, I realized that I had been living in a dream, assuming that love and effort alone would be enough to keep us together. But it wasn't. I couldn't keep up the facade anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that the cracks in our marriage weren't visible. I had ignored the signs for too long. I had been too focused on myself, too absorbed in my own world to notice the growing distance between us. And now, there was nothing left to do but pick up the pieces of a shattered life. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I couldn't help but wonder if she had been planning this all along. Had she known that this was the end? Had she been preparing herself for this moment while I was too blind to see it? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had taken her for granted, how much I had neglected her needs, her emotions. She had asked for more from me, more attention, more love, more of my time, but I had been too focused on everything else to give it to her. And now, she was gone. I finished my drink and motioned for another, the weight of the situation settling deeper into my chest. I wanted to call her, to beg her to come back, but I knew it was pointless. She had made her choice. I had been the one who pushed her away, and now it was too late. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw a message from a friend. It was a group text, the kind that had been circulating for months, filled with photos of weekend plans, work updates, and casual catch-ups. But as I stared at the message, I felt a pang of something I hadn't expected: loneliness. I had friends, but none of them knew what I was going through. None of them understood the weight of what I had just lost. I typed a quick reply, telling them I was fine, but as I hit send, I felt more disconnected than ever. It was like I was living in two different worlds, one where everything was normal, where I had a life, a future, and another where everything had fallen apart. The contrast was suffocating. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I needed to face the truth: Samantha was gone. And while I could sit here and wallow in my mistakes, it wasn't going to change anything. I had to move forward, somehow. But how? The thought of going back to an empty house, of facing the reality of my situation, was too much to bear. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to find some way to make sense of all this pain. I stood up from the bar, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on my chest. I walked out into the cool night air, the city stretching out before me like a maze. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. Not with the memories of what I had just lost. I had to move on. But how? How did you move on from the life you thought you would have forever? As I walked through the empty streets, my mind was racing. I could feel the pressure of time weighing on me. Each minute that passed, each step I took, felt like it was pulling me further away from the life I knew. I couldn't undo the damage I had caused, but I had to try. I had to find some way to redeem myself, to find peace in the midst of this chaos. The darkness seemed to swallow me whole, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alone. The kind of loneliness that cuts to your core, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew. I had nothing left. No wife, no family, just the remnants of a life that I had failed to protect. And as I walked, I knew that the hardest part of all was yet to come. I didn't know how long I walked for, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the empty streets, the city lights flickering in the distance like fading stars. The further I went, the less I felt tethered to reality. Everything had shifted so quickly. One moment, I had a family, a wife who loved me, a life that seemed like it would never change. The next, I was walking alone through a dark, unfamiliar world, with nothing but my thoughts and the bitter taste of regret. I found myself in the park we used to visit together. It wasn't far from the house, but it felt like an entirely different world. The swings creaked gently in the breeze, the grass damp from the rain earlier. It felt almost surreal, like I was walking through a dream. But the weight in my chest reminded me that it wasn't a dream. It was my life, and I had just watched it crumble before my eyes. I sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground. I couldn't stop thinking about Samantha, the way she had looked at me when she walked out, the finality in her eyes. It was a look I had never seen before, and I knew then that there was no coming back from this. She had given up on me, and in a way, I had given up on her long before she walked out that door. I had been too wrapped up in my own world to see what was happening right in front of me. I had taken her for granted, assuming she would always be there, that our love would be enough. But it wasn't. I had signed the divorce papers, yes, but the truth was I had already let go long before that moment. I had let go when I stopped listening to her, when I stopped being the partner she needed. I had let go when I stopped seeing her as my equal and started seeing her as just another part of my life, something to manage and maintain. And that was when I lost her. I could still hear her voice in my head, her words echoing through the empty park. I need more from you, Lucas. I need more than just your presence. Those words haunted me, and they always would. I had thought that if I worked hard, provided for her, kept our life together stable, that would be enough. But it wasn't. She had needed more. She had needed me, all of me, and I had failed her. I stood up and began walking again, not knowing where I was going or what I was hoping to find. I felt like a ghost, drifting through the city without any direction, without any purpose. I had lost everything I had ever cared about, and I couldn't undo the damage I had caused. I had to accept that. But how do you accept the loss of your entire life? How do you accept that you were the one who destroyed it? I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at it for a moment. There were messages on it, texts from friends, notifications from work, but it all felt so distant. I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. What could I say? How could I explain what had just happened? No one knew. No one understood the pain I was feeling. I could feel the loneliness settling in deeper, and it was suffocating. I stopped at a corner, staring at the street ahead of me, watching the cars pass by like they were part of some other world. Everything felt so disconnected, so far removed from the life I had once known. I thought about going back to the house, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The silence in that place would be unbearable now. The thought of walking through those empty rooms, seeing the spaces where we had once been, made my stomach turn. I found a small coffee shop, and without thinking, I walked inside. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went to, but I needed somewhere to sit, somewhere to ground myself in the chaos. I ordered a coffee and took a seat by the window, watching the world outside move in a way that seemed completely foreign to me now. I felt like an outsider, a stranger in my own life. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder what Samantha was doing at that moment. Was she at home, sitting in the same empty house that I had left behind? Was she relieved that it was finally over, or was she regretting her decision, just as I was regretting mine? The truth was, I would never know. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. We were two separate people now, living two separate lives, and there was no going back. The coffee cup trembled slightly in my hand as I set it down on the table. My reflection in the window caught my eye, and I barely recognized myself. I looked tired, worn out, like I had been carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders for far too long. I had never realized how much I had been neglecting myself, how much I had let everything slip away until it was too late. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I could ever fix the mess I had made or if I would even be able to find a way forward. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. The past was gone, and all I had was the present that felt empty, devoid of meaning, and full of regret. But I would have to find a way to live in it. I would have to find a way to move forward, even if it meant walking through the wreckage of everything I had once loved. The weight of my thoughts was becoming unbearable. I couldn't shake the image of Samantha's face when she left. I couldn't forget the way she had walked out the door, leaving me standing there like a fool. The house felt like a mausoleum now, a place full of memories that no longer held any warmth. It wasn't just the physical absence of her that hurt, it was the emotional emptiness, the void that had suddenly consumed everything I thought I knew about myself and our life together. I didn't know where to go. I had spent the last few days bouncing between work and aimless wandering, trying to escape the reality that had hit me like a tidal wave. Every corner I turned, every conversation I had, felt disconnected from the life I used to live. The world seemed to be moving at a pace I could no longer keep up with, and all I could do was watch from the sidelines, feeling like a spectator in my own story. I tried reaching out to friends, sending texts that were never replied to, messages that felt hollow even as I sent them. I had no one left to turn to, no one who could understand the crushing weight of what I was going through. My thoughts kept looping, each one more desperate than the last, each one full of questions that I knew didn't have answers. Why had I failed? What could I have done differently? Was I truly that blind to her needs, her pain? I found myself back at the bar that I had walked into the other night, the same bar that had offered me a temporary escape, a way to forget, even if just for a moment. I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of alcohol and wood overwhelming my senses. The noise inside was a strange comfort, the conversations around me muffled and distant. I slid into a seat at the bar, ordering a drink without even thinking about it. The bartender didn't ask any questions. He simply poured me a drink, his eyes already knowing that I was just another lost soul looking for solace at the bottom of a glass. I didn't want to think about Samantha. I didn't want to think about how she had left, how everything had fallen apart in a matter of weeks. But I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I had failed her, that I had failed us. As the minutes ticked by, I found myself lost in my own mind. My fingers traced the rim of my glass, my thoughts scattered, swirling in the haze of alcohol. The world around me seemed to blur as I stared into the glass, hoping that the numbness would come and give me some relief from the constant ache in my chest. But it never came. No matter how many drinks I had, no matter how hard I tried to drown out the pain, it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I sat there, alone in the crowd, when the door to the bar opened. A woman walked in, her figure silhouetted against the dim light from outside. She had an air of confidence, something about her that was magnetic. She was the type of woman who commanded attention without trying. But I wasn't interested. Not in her. Not in anyone. But as she passed by, her eyes met mine. She stopped for a moment, her gaze lingering on me for just a second too long. I felt a strange pull in my chest, but I quickly looked away. I didn't have the energy for distractions. Not tonight. She walked up to the bar and ordered a drink, settling into the seat next to me. I could feel the presence of her beside me, the energy she brought into the space. I wasn't sure if it was her presence or the alcohol, but suddenly, I felt something shift inside of me. The ache in my chest, the weight of everything that had happened, felt just a little bit lighter. "Long night?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost soothing. I glanced at her briefly, unsure of what to say. "Something like that," I muttered, not looking up. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to share my pain, my failures. But there was something in the way she spoke, something comforting, that made it hard to ignore her. She didn't press me for details. Instead, she simply nodded, taking a sip of her drink. For a moment, there was an awkward silence between us, the kind that comes when two people don't really know what to say but are still drawn to each other in some inexplicable way. "You know," she said after a while, her tone light, "life has a funny way of throwing us off course. But that doesn't mean we're lost forever." I blinked, surprised by her words. For some reason, they hit me harder than I expected. I looked over at her, finally meeting her eyes. "What do you mean?" She smiled, a small, almost knowing smile. "I mean that no matter how far off track we get, we can always find our way back. It's never too late to change direction, to make a different choice." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, the words resonating deep within me. They were so simple, yet so profound. I had spent so much time beating myself up for what I had lost, for the mistakes I had made. But was it really too late? Was there still a chance for me to turn things around? For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, as small and fragile as it was. I took a deep breath, my fingers still tracing the rim of my glass, and made a decision. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for me to find my way back. Not just to Samantha, but to the person I had lost along the way. The days that followed felt different. I woke up with a sense of purpose that had been missing for far too long. It wasn't that I had completely figured everything out, but something had shifted inside of me. The conversation at the bar with the woman, who I now realized had been a catalyst, though I didn't know her name, had planted a seed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel entirely hopeless. I still thought about Samantha every day. I still regretted the mistakes I had made and the time I had wasted, but I realized that living in the past wasn't going to bring her back. If anything, it would only keep me locked in a cycle of self-pity, keeping me from moving forward. It was time to face the reality of what had happened and take responsibility for my part in it. But it was also time to forgive myself, to let go of the guilt that had been weighing me down. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself, working on the things I had neglected, not just in my marriage, but in my own life. I started going to therapy, something I had been avoiding for years. It felt strange at first, talking to someone about my feelings, my fears, my failures, but it was exactly what I needed. Slowly, I began to peel back the layers of myself that I had buried for so long. I learned that being vulnerable didn't make me weak, it made me human. And I was ready to be human again. I also started reconnecting with old friends. Friends I had pushed aside when I was so consumed with work and my marriage. It was humbling to realize how much I had taken for granted. But it also reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had people in my life who cared about me, even when I didn't show them the same care. One afternoon, a few weeks after the night at the bar, I found myself standing outside Samantha's apartment. My heart was racing as I stared at the door, my hand hovering over the doorbell. I had no idea how this conversation would go. I didn't know if she would even want to talk to me. But I knew that I had to try. I had to apologize. Not just for the mistakes I had made, but for not being the man she deserved. For not being the partner she needed. I pressed the doorbell, my stomach turning with nerves. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was. Samantha. Her expression was guarded, but there was no anger in her eyes, just a quiet curiosity. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice steady but not cold. "What are you doing here?" I took a deep breath. "I came to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I owe you an apology. For everything. I wasn't the husband you needed. I wasn't the man I should have been. And I'm sorry. For not seeing you. For not listening. For not giving you what you deserved." Samantha didn't say anything for a long moment. I could see the walls she had built up around herself, the hesitance in her eyes. But there was also something else, something softer, something I hadn't seen in a while. "I didn't think you'd come," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I didn't think you realized what I needed, or that you'd ever be willing to change." "I didn't either," I admitted, my voice raw. "But I've been working on myself. I've been trying to become the man I should have been. For you, for me, for us." She studied me for a moment, and then, without a word, stepped aside to let me in. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't know what to expect. What I did know was that this was the first step, no matter what happened next. We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, about everything. About what had gone wrong, about the pain we had both felt, and about the future we both wanted. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of silence, moments where we both had to gather our thoughts, but it felt real. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were really seeing each other again. By the time I left, the weight on my chest had lessened. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't expect things to be perfect. But I knew that the road ahead would be different. I was different. And no matter what happened with Samantha, I had taken responsibility for my actions. I had finally found the courage to face my mistakes, and that was something I could be proud of. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The past still stung, but it no longer controlled me. I wasn't perfect, but I was trying. I was learning. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And so, as I drove away, I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. Because I had finally learned how to move forward. And that was the beginning of my new life.